Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on A Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Jane Roper, and my guest today is Douglas Abrams. He is the New York Times bestselling co-author of The Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It's the first book in the Global Icon series. He's also the founder and president of Idea Architects, a literary agency and media development company helping visionaries to create a wiser, healthier, and more just world. He lives in Santa Cruz, California, and his new book is The Book of Hope, co-authored with Dr. Jane Goodall. Goodall, of course, is an ethologist and environmentalist, best known for her 60-year study of social and family interactions of wild chimpanzees at Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania. Jane has reached millions around the world with her books, lectures, podcasts, and her efforts to raise awareness about climate change and loss of biodiversity. She was appointed a UN Messenger of Peace, is Dame of the British Empire, and has received countless honors from around the world. And unfortunately, she cannot be with us today, but she will be here in spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she absolutely will. I know. In the Book of Hope, wonderful little book here. A survival. It's called the subtitle is Survival Guide for Trying Times. And in it, Abrams and Goodall explore vital questions about hope. What is it? How do we stay hopeful when everything seems hopeless? How do we cultivate hope? How do we take action with hope? And what's the relationship between hope and how we live our lives? And it's filled with anecdotes about Jane's life, about your life, Doug. And some stories of hope and resilience from around the world. Super inspiring. So thank you so much for being with us today.
So great to be with you. And thank you for your kind words about the book. It was, we had no idea how needed it would be. But hope is obviously something we're desperate for at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I imagine when the idea for the book came about, it was pre-COVID. Yeah. In fact, your process gets a little bit interrupted by COVID in the writing of the book.
Exactly.
Tell us, how did this book come to be? Where did the idea come from? How did it get started?
So after working with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu on the Book of Joy, we were thinking about who we wanted to work with for the next book in the Global Icon series and what the next topic would be. Mm-hmm. And I've always been fascinated by Jane and her incredible work as a scientist and her deep understanding of nature and human nature. And I think that it came out of my own deep questions about what in our nature can give us hope and what in the world can give us hope when so much seems to be pointing against hope or feels like we're hell-bent on our own destruction. And I think any parent who's had children as I have, wonders like what kind of world we're going to be giving those kids, and is there hope for them and their world. And so it was just such an incredible privilege for Jane to say she wanted to do the Book of Hope together and to get to learn from her. And she's just, one of the things I'll say about working with her is I was really deeply surprised by who I found and as a collaborator and an interviewee for the project, and happy to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to hear. So the format of the book is really a dialogue, a series of conversations between you and Jane.
Yeah.
And some of that happened in person, some of it was remote. Tell me what you mean about, what surprised you about meeting her.
Well, I think that, one of the things, as you said, it is a dialogue. I've been really delighted by people saying that they feel like they're in the room with us. Yes.
Whiskey and all.
That was definitely the goal. Yes. So whiskey was a surprise. I had, I'm not a big drinker. And as I was getting ready for the interview, found out that she likes to have a tot of whiskey, a wee dram of whiskey, as she calls it. And so I had to prepare. I had to train for the whiskey drinking. And my adult daughter was giving me lessons on whiskey drinking. And so, and I got to have dinner with her and her family. And there was a lot of whiskey celebration. And But really what I think, even beyond her love of whiskey and her sense of humor and her love of her family, what I think was most profound and inspiring for me was that I knew she was a great scientist, but I really saw both her as a great humanitarian and as a great seeker, somebody who's really willing to ask the biggest questions in life. So many scientists, and we work with a lot of scientists who are creating a wiser, healthier, more just world, but a lot of scientists get very focused on their area of expertise. And Jane has been studying chimpanzees as a way of understanding human nature for 60 years, as you mentioned, but she's really captivated by the largest questions about who we are, what we're doing here, what our future is, what's going to happen after a death. Really. And so she has, like, I would say, a seeker's willingness to ask the big questions and a scientist's willingness to trust the facts wherever they may lead.
That's a great description, and that's very much reflected in the kinds of conversations you have. In the very opening of the book, you first sort of set out to define hope together and understand what's the difference between hope and optimism, and is hope something that is naive, or is it something that's rooted in the actual possibility? And you say, I think, that you came into the conversation a little skeptical, but you ended up in a different place. Where did you guys end up with your discussion of what hope is?
Well, I think that I was skeptical because I'm a born and raised New Yorker, and I think we don't really do hope in New York. We do. Yes, there's hope there, but we're much more comfortable with kind of fear, anger, cynicism,
Sure.
at least skepticism. It's not. I think a lot of people wonder if hope is just kind of Pollyanna, kind of let's hope for the best. And so I think I went in with that concern or fear. And what the transformation I went through was realizing that the kind of enduring hope and grounded hope and that Jane is talking about is really about action, and it's about pragmatic relationship to the world, and that it's an anticipation of adversity, it's an anticipation of obstacles. And I think this is the distinction. You mentioned hope and optimism. I think optimism can be a kind of philosophy or approach to life or a temperament, like, oh, everything's going to turn out for the best. And real hope is about looking at the facts and seeing the reality of what it is and hoping that you can make the future better than the present. That's, at its core, that's what hope is. And what was also fascinating was to see that what Jane calls hope a human survival trait, that it's actually something that evolved in our nature to help us, help us dream and imagine and create our individual lives and the world in a different way. And specifically, I think what we found out when we looked at, kind of the science, which was so interesting, was that hope originates in the prefrontal cortex in the same place that imagination, language, problem solving, and our ability to kind of time travel and think about the future. All of that is that kind of same very human part of the brain. And so while animals have some dimension of hope, as you can, she says, think of your dog waiting for you, at the door, waiting for you to come home. That's an expression of hope. It's really this capacity to hope and imagine for the future. And this is really kind of uniquely human in the depth that we have it.
Right. Yeah. And it ties in, I think you mentioned this, that ability to tell stories, which is one of the big things that sets humans apart. Hope really is a story you're telling yourself of something that could be possible. And it's putting together the parts of the what if, but also but we can meet that what if with this. The book is divided into several. The middle section is Jane's 4 reasons for hope. And I'd love to, if we could touch on each of those, that would be great. Sure. I will say them all first. The first is the power of the human intellect, the resilience of nature, the power of young people, and the indomitable human spirit. So the first one, the power of human intellect. This was really fascinating, and talk about the difference between intelligence, which animals have as well, versus intellect, which is a uniquely human thing. Can you explain a little bit the difference?
Sure. I think it's, well, certainly intellect and intelligence are on the spectrum of,
Right.
brain evolution.
Sure.
But humans have this extraordinary problem solving collaborative ability that I think is very much about our kind of prefrontal cortex, and that ability to work with one another, to shared goals, to imagine a future, to create this incredible civilization. I mean, it's astonishing to realize and remember that basically everything that we think of as human civilization is 6,000 years old. I mean, we just created this kind of out of the rocks and the soil, and now we take it as kind of the inevitable reality. We can also reimagine that, and kind of as we're going to need to reimagine a post-carbon world, and a world, post-hydrocarbon, I should say, world. We have this incredible problem-solving ability and this incredible ability to transcend beyond ourselves. And actually, this is also the whole role of education and culture. We're really and I think Jane was really pivotal in showing that this is all on a spectrum, like personality, emotion, tool making. She discovered that animals can make tools. So there is a spectrum, but we have taken it to this whole nother level where we can create these tools, imagine this kind of civilizational project, and then change it from generation to generation, and evolve those values that we have, and change that nurturance that we have. So that's a kind of unique part of the intellect that is human. What Jane says is, she doesn't use the word intelligence because what intelligent creature would destroy its only home? And so I think, the way I think about it is the experiment in human intelligence has not yet been proven successful. But but what we have a fighting chance, and we're doing, and we have that intellect to draw upon. And just as we've sent rovers to Mars and people to the moon, we can similarly reimagine our civilization. And we are. I mean, I think one of the things that, unfortunately, so many people are waking up to the environmental crisis that we have, but we need both urgency and hope. We need to understand and fear and anger about what's happening. Those are really, really important. But we need to also recognize that there are solutions, and a lot of what we need is just political will. We worked with Christiana Figueres on a book called The Future We Choose. She did the Paris Climate Treaty, with her, and the book is done with her deputy, Tom Karnak. And it's an extraordinary, I was just at the climate meetings in England, and it's an amazing thing that we set this goal of being, carbon neutral by 2050. We said we're going to, go to a green economy. And even though we're not going fast enough and we're not doing everything we should be doing, the largest oil companies in the world are also signing on to that as a goal and reimagining themselves as post-carbon and hydrocarbon companies. So I think it's just a reminder that imagination, that ability to hope for that better future, really drives everything. So that is the intellect. I mean, there's so many fascinating things we can say about the human intellect. I asked her, but hasn't this human intellect done as much evil as it's done good? I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, and how do we harness it in the good direction when it's clearly capable of wreaking so much havoc? And we're very good at using our intellect for bad ends. So it's just a matter of how do we channel it into a better place. But the fact that we have it,
exactly. And we said, I asked her, are we 51% good or 51% evil? And her response was, I think we're split down the middle. And what determines which way we go is our environment. And when she said that, it kind of blew my mind, because it helped me to see for the first time that all these things that we think of as our vices, our aggression, our greed, our violence, actually helped us survive in certain environments. So really, we think of these as our virtues and vices in ourselves, but in many cases, it's what the environment requires. And if we are able to create environments where the better angels of our nature win, right, that inclines our intellect in the direction that we want to go.
Right. And there are occasionally occasions when the two overlap, right? So I often think about the fact that some of the innovations that have come around for the environment are driven by a desire for profit. So it's this funny thing where greed is also powering innovation for good. I mean, not that you can't always tease apart, right? Greed,
right.
There's nothing wrong with making money.
Right.
But so maybe that's an example of, okay, we're channeling something that maybe is a vice into a positive.
Right, exactly. I think our fundamental human nature is not going to change, and it's not going to evolve at a time scale that we need. So the question is, how do we work with that human nature in order to recognize? And I think that's the fascinating thing, is how much all of that we get to choose which aspects of our human nature we're going to encourage and draw upon.
Yeah. All right, let's talk resiliency of nature, because I will say that this chapter, this section, gave me the most hope. Just reading about nature's ability to heal itself and restore itself. There are so many wonderful little anecdotes in this section. What was one of your favorites? One of your favorite examples?
Well, I love the survivor trees stories. I mean, there's two incredible stories that she tells. One about a tree that was destroyed at 9/11, at Ground Zero on 9/11, where this tree was, where the towers came down, and this tree roots were shattered. It was black. There was only one branch that was still alive. And the New York Botanical Garden took the tree and kind of nursed it back to life. And it's now this tree that, children come to, birds are nesting in, as a kind of a symbol of resilience. And I think even kind of in some ways more extraordinary at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there were trees as well. And she tells a story about a tree, trees, these camphor trees in Nagasaki that were 500-year-old trees that were in this incredible blast that was the heat of the sun, and nobody thought anything was going to live after this incredible atomic destruction. Had vaporized so much life and buildings. And this tree, is one that she talks about, but there are a number of them that came back, from their blackened, charred, destroyed state. And there are these sacred trees that are symbols of peace, that people go and they leave their hopes and their dreams and their prayers in these trees as a reminder of that resiliency. And I think those, it was so fascinating to hear that ecosystems come back in 10 to 50 years. Nature wants to return. I think we saw this during COVID, even where, when people were home, the natural world started to take back the streets, and the animals started to come back, and, the seas come back more quickly. So I think it's a reminder that if we stop destroying nature, or we even encourage and support it, it has this incredible, as Michael Crichton said, life will find a way. So really the challenge is, we as human beings, can we earn our place as a welcome species in the natural world? And this distinction between a welcome and invasive species is that a welcome species gives more to the environment than it takes. And can we be that welcome species that supports and encourages the natural world, and doesn't just exploit and extract from it?
Yeah. And I think this resiliency works on both a symbolic and actual level, right? Obviously, we can find hope in the metaphor of things restoring themselves and be inspired by nature. But also, I find a lot of times when I hear news, climate change news, I just feel this despair, like, oh, the coral, the Great Barrier Reef, it's just going to be gone forever, and
Yeah.
this is going to be gone forever. But when the fact is things. And that can make you feel hopeless and despairing and not feel like it's not worth it. It's not worth trying to do anything. But knowing that things do heal themselves, I mean, that really inspires hope. I mean, that's amazing. I think often about in Chernobyl, the whole dead zone has been reclaimed by wildlife, and there are these formerly endangered wild horses that are trotting around in the exclusion zone.
Yeah.
And also, I think I read something recently about about coral reefs sort of rebuilding themselves in areas, and I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. I mean, there's such inspiring stories of people who are seeding reefs. They're using trays of coral polyps, and the coral is building itself back. We worked with David Attenborough on a book called A Life on Planet Earth, and many who have read that book or seen the film, he talks about Chernobyl and that incredible ability for nature to come back even after that amazing destruction. So I think you're right. I mean, it is incredibly inspiring, and we, there's so much that we can do to encourage that healing and speed up that healing. I mean, the reason the metaphor works is we are nature.
Right.
Like our resiliency is a part of nature's resiliency. So we think about it as it's us, and then there's the plants and the trees in the natural world, and it's all a part of the natural world. We are an expression of that, and I think we talk about the work of Suzanne Simard in the book, who studied and discovered the intelligence and communication of trees, for example, and her amazing book, Finding the Mother Tree. And her work was the inspiration for the Tree of Souls and Avatar, and when that recognition that that intelligence we were talking about on a spectrum, that it's in the plants, it's in the grass, it's in the trees. We are this outgrowth of that of that expression, and we think of ourselves as and we've lost that connection. We've lost the recognition that we, like the trees, are competing at times and cooperating at times, and but there's this large dance of mutualism for our shared survival, and that's and the species that don't get that right go out extinct. So we got to get that balance right.
Right. No, absolutely. So the next section was the youth, young people, the power of young people. All right. Another inspiring one. And I think the distinction that Jane made here that was really important was, it's not just, okay, kids, fix it. It's, yes, kids fix it, but we who are not the kids need to be supporting and encouraging them in their efforts. So one of the things that featured prominently in this section was the organization with the Jane Goodall Institute, the Roots and Shoots. I was going to get it backwards, Shoots and Roots. Tell us a bit about this organization and some of the things that young people are doing.
Well, so in many ways, Jane recognized very early on that any change really needed to start with the next generation and the transforming those values. And so I think it's now in 68 countries that Roots and Shoots has been creating this kind of what's often called the Jane generation of young people who recognize our interconnection with the natural world, who are working on people, planet, and animals. And I think Jane also recognized really early that it's not, again, we need to be working in our communities to support the people, the animals, and the natural environment, or the plants, and healing all of that. And then they're all connected. And so I think it's fascinating because again, as you remember, I really pushed her about yes, young people are amazing and their values are changing. and can they change fast enough? And, you know, how can they do it in a time scale that matters, because we don't necessarily have time for them to all grow up before we have to solve these problems. And so, you know, Jane's response, as you said, was, you know, yes, we need to be working with them. We need to be supporting them, and teaching them and showing them. I mean, I once went to the kind of biologists and I asked them, you know, is there anything in our human nature that is stronger than ignorance, fear, and greed? You know, and what I got back was our parental instinct. You know, it's our love of our children. You know, it's our mother love, our father love. That is our greatest, deepest instinct. So our ability to recognize that we're doing this for our children. This is not about, you know, being green, or this is not about, you know, this is about, you know, taking care of our kids. And I think one of the things you sparked earlier was just, it's so easy to go from denial to despair. And I think that it's so crucial to recognize that both of those are passive responses, right? And you know, we talked about in the Resilience of Nature chapter that we were talking about eco-grief, but you were talking about the despair, you know, or the grief that you feel for the loss of the coral reefs. And I think we all can relate to that sense of the loss. But I think recognizing that it's not just a one-way street. It's not just that we have to accept loss as inevitable and permanent. And that the Earth has gone through, you know, 6 great extinctions and comes back, right? And so the question is, we are causing the 6th great extinction, and can we, you know, navigate our way to make, you know, to protect those species and to protect the Earth from that, and as you said, solastalgia, you know, that sense of, you know, that eco grief, that sense of loss. It's real, and I think it's super important to not let go of that. To recognize that grief is part of the healing. Grief is part of how we find our way to real grounded hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Final section. Penultimate section was the indomitable human spirit, and some great stories of humans surviving adversity, whether it's, you know, Londoners during the Blitz, World War II, or people with disabilities doing incredible things. I loved the part at the end, or I think it was toward the end, where Jane talks about Lord of the Rings as a metaphor for, you know, how we can face climate change and injustice and political strife, how it speaks to all the different sort of chapters and characters and obstacles that we face. But tell us more about that conversation with Jane. Not necessarily the Middle Earth part specifically, unless if you want to geek out on Middle Earth, go for it. But
yes, I was like, is that the indomitable Hobbit spirit? You know,
right?
So,
yes, that was
but so yeah, I think, you know, what Jane is talking about is this transpersonal. There's the resilience that is within us individually, and that's extraordinary. And you know, we work with a trauma researcher named Rachel Yehuda, who's been working with PTSD and veterans. And, you know, her point is that, you know, we have these incredible adversities in our lives and traumas, but actually this is not pathological. You know, it can become pathological, but trauma is not pathological in and of itself. Trauma is how we discover the world and know ourselves. It's like the nature of being human is going through adversity and often traumatic experiences. And becoming more resilient and strengthening ourselves as a result of that. So this powerful sense of how we can discover resilience within ourselves. And then there's something transpersonal, which is if we don't finish the job. You know, she talked a bunch about the people like Martin Luther King, and, you know, Winston Churchill and others who inspired others. You know, she said, you know, this, you know, what kept them safe in World War II against the Nazi threat was as much the words of Winston Churchill and that ability to cultivate hope as it was the feeble scaffolding in the sea that was protecting them from, you know, the Nazi Navy. And it's like this ability. And I think what Jane does in this book so powerfully is she kind of gives the Churchill speech, we will fight them on the beaches, of rallying us and reminding us of our ability to fight the good fight, and also to know that if we don't finish the work, that indomitable human spirit transcends even our own life and our own ability to do the work, and to keep to solve this ultimately.
Right. That does give one hope. I mean, hearing that and thinking about and reading about the things that humans are capable of, it is a good reminder. We can do this. We can survive this, and we can make it better. One last question for me, and then I have a question from a viewer.
Sure.
But actually, I have a zillion more questions, but we don't have time. But the last chapter is about being a messenger of hope. And Jane has certainly done this. I mean, you're doing this through your books and your work that you're doing at your literary agency.
Yeah.
If you could give one piece of advice to folks on, something that they could do, or an attitude that they could assume to try to create positive change, to try to put hope into action, what would you say?
That's such a great question. I think it's remembering that hope is contagious, and it's actually one of the researchers described it as a social gift. It's something we give to one another, and there's kind of two parts, I would say. So the first pillar of joy that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu gave in the Book of Joy was perspective. That it all starts in our minds. Whether we focus narrowly on the heartache and heartbreak in front of us, or if we're able to zoom out and see that wider perspective. And I think what Jane has given us here is that wider perspective of the resilience of nature, the evolutionary history of humanity, and our capacity, our intellect, our power of our young people, our indomitable spirit. And so if we can, I think the first step is just to shift our own perspective so we nurture and cultivate our own hope. And then I think it's really giving it to others. And whether that's our children or our friends and family, really helping them to find hope in their lives. And that can be at a macro level about how we see the world. And there's so many things that I think people just get despairing about our politics, or our COVID, or all the things that are challenging us right now. Or it can be in somebody's individual life, and just helping them find hope in that particular moment when they lose track of that wider perspective.
Yeah. I love that idea. I love that idea of giving hope as a gift. And you can also give the book as a gift. That's a good way to start. So a question from one of our viewers, Alana, asking what leads you to your writing topics. And I was going to ask something similar. How do you seek out what you're going to work on next, and what is next?
So we evaluate all projects based on how much joy, growth, and contribution they're going to create in the world. We see ourselves as kind of a movement of movements, and helping to catalyze the next stage of global evolutionary culture. And so the battle for the future is in our minds and in our hearts. It's really about, we lose track. We think it's all out there, but it's really in here. It's kind of what we're talking about in terms of hope. And so our goal with the books and films and television shows that we work on is to think about, where can we free people from outmoded beliefs? Where can we transform the way that we see our lives and see the world, so that there is more hope, there is more joy, there's more freedom and justice. So that's how we pick our topics. We, in terms of the Global Icon series, we have not picked our next global icon to work with yet. So your listeners, if they have ideas of who we should work with, they can come to our websites at Idea Architects or my personal author website. And I think you're going to put those links up and tell us who they think we should work with next. But I really feel like I'm, the people's ambassador. It's this incredible, incredible privilege that I can't, kind of blows my mind that I get to sit down with these folks. And really, I do it on behalf of all of us who are looking for inspiration and guidance and direction together.
That's awesome. Well, I'm very excited to see what is next. And let's see if we have any other questions. I don't think we do. Anyway, all righty. Well, thank you so much, Doug. It has been a pleasure having you and hearing more about the book. I encourage everyone to run out and grab this. It's a perfect gift. And it really does, like you said, it feels like you're in the room with you, listening to these conversations, get your little dram of whiskey at your side and join in the conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And I have to say before we part that independent booksellers are these crossroads of culture and hope for our communities. They are where our this cradle of our imagination and our sense of possibility in our own lives and in the world. And so I'm so delighted that you are really supporting and nurturing this community of booksellers and book buyers who are, I'm working on a novel actually where, the booksellers are kind of the underground railroad of ideas.
That's great.
And so it's really, they're just crucial to our community. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. And we will throw the link up there to bookshop.org, which proceeds go to independent bookstores and actually help support A Mighty Blaze too. When you buy it there, we always like to tell folks to please buy independent whenever possible. So, and I love that novel idea. I can't wait to see that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Awesome, Jane. Thanks to you and to everyone for listening.